After nearly 30 years, one question still hangs over America like winter air in an empty house. Can modern DNA technology do what detectives, headlines, theories, and public obsession never could? On the night after Christmas in 1996, JonBenét Ramsey became the center of one of the most haunting murder cases in modern history. But this is no longer only a story about the past. In Boulder, investigators say the case is still active, evidence is still being tested and retested, and new forensic methods are still being pursued. So tonight, we are not simply reopening an old mystery. We are stepping into a race between memory, myth, and science. A quiet street. Fresh snow. Christmas lights fading behind curtained windows. Inside one of the most famous homes in true crime history, a 6-year-old girl is gone, and by the end of the day, America will be looking at Boulder, Colorado, with a mix of grief, disbelief, and morbid fascination. JonBenét Ramsey was reported missing on December 26, 1996, and later found dead inside her family's home. From that moment on, the case stopped being only an investigation. It became a national obsession, a cultural wound, and eventually, a battlefield of theories. For decades, people argued over the ransom note, the family, the crime scene, the media circus. But beneath all of that noise, one word kept returning like a ghost: DNA. DNA sounded, to the public, like the perfect witness. Silent. Objective. Incorruptible. The kind of evidence that does not forget, does not panic, does not lie. And in the JonBenét case, that promise became incredibly powerful. If DNA existed, many believed, then surely the truth existed with it. But science inside a real murder investigation is rarely that simple. Officials have said for years that the available DNA in this case is extremely small and complex. In other words, the very evidence that might unlock the mystery is also fragile enough to be consumed, damaged, or limited by the testing itself. The miracle tool people imagined was, in reality, a narrow and dangerous doorway. That is where the story changes. Because this is not 1997 anymore. It is an era of forensic methods that can sometimes recover meaning from traces once considered almost useless. And Boulder police have repeatedly said the investigation remains active, that detectives have conducted new interviews, collected new evidence, and tested and retested items in pursuit of fresh leads. They have also emphasized that technology related to DNA testing continues to evolve, and that they are working with outside experts, federal partners, state agencies, and forensic laboratories across the country. Just as important, the city has publicly pushed back on misinformation, stating that claims they are ignoring viable DNA evidence are false. That matters, because in this case, confusion has often spread faster than facts. So the real mystery is no longer only who killed JonBenét Ramsey. It is whether time itself has become part of the investigation. Whether evidence once too small, too mixed, too uncertain can now be read with greater precision. Whether the science that once raised more questions than answers may finally separate signal from contamination, rumor from reality, and possibility from proof. Because if modern DNA can reopen this door, then nearly 30 years of assumption may begin to crack. And if that happens, the next shock will not be that this case was unsolved for so long. It will be that we may have misunderstood it the entire time. And behind that door may wait a truth powerful enough to shatter what America believed it knew. For years, DNA in the JonBenét Ramsey case has been treated almost like a magic key, the one piece of evidence that could end every argument in a single moment. But in reality, DNA is not a confession. It is not a videotape. It is a biological trace, and traces are only as clear as the conditions in which they are found, collected, preserved, and interpreted. In this case, officials have repeatedly indicated that the evidence is limited, complex, and still part of an open investigation. Boulder police say they continue to work with DNA experts, outside forensic laboratories, the FBI, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and the District Attorney's Office, while also testing and retesting evidence as technology evolves. That matters because the public conversation about DNA has often been far simpler than the science itself. To many viewers, the phrase "there is DNA" sounds definitive, as if a name should instantly appear at the end of a laboratory report. But forensic biology rarely works that way, especially in older cases. Sometimes a sample is tiny. Sometimes it is mixed, meaning genetic material from more than one person may be present. Sometimes the material is degraded by time, handling, environment, or repeated testing. And sometimes the most important question is not whether DNA exists, but what that DNA actually means. Was it deposited during the crime, before the crime, or after the crime through innocent contact? The science can detect presence. It does not automatically explain timing, intent, or guilt. This is where the controversy around JonBenét's case became so intense. DNA, for some people, represented exoneration. For others, it represented an unknown intruder. And for many investigators, it represented both promise and limitation at the same time. The same molecule that seemed capable of solving everything also became a source of public misunderstanding. Boulder's official statements now directly address that confusion. The city has publicly rejected claims that police are refusing to pursue viable DNA evidence, calling those assertions false, while stressing that DNA-related technology continues to improve and remains part of the case strategy. In other words, the debate is not whether DNA matters. The debate is how much it can truly tell us, and whether modern methods can recover answers from evidence that earlier generations of forensic science could not fully unlock. And modern methods are different. Today, forensic scientists can sometimes work with smaller samples, interpret complex mixtures more carefully, and use enhanced analytical approaches that were not available in the late 1990s. That does not guarantee a breakthrough. But it changes the landscape. A fragment once dismissed as too weak may now be reconsidered. A profile once too incomplete may now be measured against new standards. A dead end from one decade can become a lead in another. Boulder Police emphasized in their recent update that techniques and technology constantly evolve, especially in DNA testing, and that new interviews, new evidence collection, and renewed testing have continued. So the hidden mechanism is not just DNA itself. It is the collision between evidence and time. An unsolved murder from 1996 is now being examined in the age of far more advanced forensic interpretation. That means every old assumption is vulnerable. Every certainty becomes less certain. Because if science now sees more than it once could, then the future of this case may depend not on a dramatic confession, but on a microscopic signal almost invisible to the naked eye. And if that signal finally speaks clearly, then the mystery surrounding JonBenét Ramsey may not shrink. It may become even larger, because the truth could force America to confront how much of this story was never fact at all. If this case is ever solved, the biggest revelation may not be the name of the killer. It may be the collapse of the story America told itself for nearly 3 decades. Because the JonBenét Ramsey case was never shaped by evidence alone. It was shaped by television, tabloid culture, suspicion, wealth, beauty pageants, police missteps, legal battles, and the hypnotic power of an unsolved crime that seemed to invite everyone to become a detective. Over time, the mystery hardened into mythology. And mythology is dangerous, because once people believe they already understand a case, new truth does not arrive gently. It arrives like an explosion. Boulder police say the homicide investigation remains open and active, that new interviews have been conducted, new evidence collected, and existing evidence tested and retested as methods improve. The city has also publicly rejected false claims that investigators are refusing to pursue DNA, emphasizing that evolving forensic technology remains part of the strategy. That is why a real breakthrough here would do more than solve a murder. It would challenge memory itself. Imagine the force of that moment, an answer emerging not from a dramatic confession, not from a forgotten witness, but from microscopic biological material preserved across time. A signal smaller than dust, carrying consequences enormous enough to rewrite one of America's most infamous criminal narratives. If modern testing isolates a meaningful lead, then every loud certainty that dominated this case could suddenly look fragile. Every theory repeated for years on television might shrink before a lab result that does not care what the public prefers to believe. And yet even that possibility carries a warning. DNA can identify, exclude, or redirect, but it must still be interpreted within the full case. It is powerful, not magical. That is why officials have stressed that more evidence is needed, whether that evidence is DNA or something else entirely. There is also a deeper implication, one larger than this single case. The JonBenét investigation now stands at the intersection of two eras, the age of spectacle and the age of precision forensics. In 1996, the country consumed this tragedy through panic and projection. In 2026, investigators are still working inside a world transformed by better databases, improved laboratory methods, renewed evidence review, and the ability to revisit old assumptions with new tools. The longer a mystery survives, the more it reveals about the society staring at it. We do not only ask who committed the crime. We ask whom we were willing to suspect, which narratives we rewarded, which errors we turned into folklore, which doubts we mistook for facts. And that is why this story still grips the world. Not simply because a child was taken, and not only because justice remains unfinished, but because the case has become a mirror. It reflects our hunger for certainty, our vulnerability to narrative, and our faith that science can rescue truth from the wreckage of noise. Perhaps modern DNA will reopen the door. Perhaps it will only narrow the darkness. But even that would matter. Because in cold cases, progress is not always a sudden spotlight. Sometimes it is a faint line appearing where the world once saw only shadow. And if JonBenét Ramsey's case is ever truly solved, it may change more than the verdict of history. It may change everything the public thought this tragedy meant. Because the most unsettling possibility is not that the truth has vanished forever completely. It is that the truth has been waiting patiently, in silence, for science to become worthy of hearing it. There is one more layer to this story that makes it endure, and it lives in the uneasy space between forensic possibility and human expectation. People often imagine a solved case as a clean ending, one final test, one confirmed identity, one last press conference, and the long darkness suddenly lifted. But real justice, especially in a case this old and this emotionally loaded, rarely arrives with that kind of simplicity. If modern DNA analysis moves the JonBenét Ramsey investigation forward, it will not just answer questions. It will also create new ones. What exactly does the evidence prove? How strong is the connection? Was the recovered material central to the crime, or only adjacent to it? In a case shaped by decades of speculation, every new scientific development will have to fight its way through an enormous wall of memory, emotion, and narrative baggage. That is what makes this investigation so unusual. The science is not entering a silent room. It is entering one of the loudest crime stories in American history. For nearly 30 years, the public has built elaborate maps around this case, maps of guilt, innocence, motive, family dynamics, police failures, media distortion, and social class. Many of those maps were drawn with incomplete information. Some were drawn with outright misinformation. And when a story survives that long, it stops behaving like a case file and starts behaving like folklore. The danger of folklore is that people do not simply believe it. They protect it. They repeat it. They live inside it. So if new forensic analysis challenges those old assumptions, the shock may come not only from what is discovered, but from what must be unlearned. And that is why the modern direction of the investigation matters beyond true crime itself. It shows how technology can return to the past and ask better questions than an earlier era knew how to ask. A sample once considered too weak may now carry weight. A conclusion once treated as solid may now appear premature. In that sense, progress is not only about solving the mystery. It is also about correcting the limits of the time in which the mystery was first investigated. Science does not erase human error, but sometimes it exposes it. Sometimes it narrows the distance between what happened and what people merely believed had happened. Yet even here, humility is essential. DNA may become the key development in this case, or it may remain one important thread among many. The most honest path forward is neither blind certainty nor cynical dismissal. It is patience. It is precision. It is the willingness to let evidence speak in its own language, even when that language is slower and less dramatic than public obsession demands. Because perhaps that is the final truth hidden inside the JonBenét Ramsey case. Not just that justice can be delayed, but that truth itself can be delayed, buried beneath noise until the world learns how to listen more carefully. And if that day finally comes, it will not simply reopen an old door. It will force us to ask whether we were ever really looking at the case clearly at all.